It's the Nittany No Huddle podcast, filmed at the Nittany No Huddle studios. I'm your host, Jordo, here with Zach and Coach Devin. All right, welcome back to the Nittany No Huddle podcast. Today's episode, we're going to break down Penn State at Purdue, a Thursday night game. I'm going to turn it over right away to Devin. You got anything to talk about in regards to, going on the road, Thursday night game? It's kind of a weird season opener.
Yeah, just a couple of notes here about Penn State. It's the seventh season in a row that they've opened their Big Ten schedule on the road. There's a big article about that this summer. That it's just not great for the program to be one of your top premier third or fourth best program in the Big Ten and to be on the road for your first game every single year, 12 times in the last 13 years. So only once in the last 13 years have they had a Big Ten opener at home. It's kind of crazy to think about. They are, however, 111, 22-2 all time in season openers. Obviously, being in the Big Ten and being an independent before that, they pretty much opened with cupcakes every season until the Big Ten decided to open with a Big Ten game last couple of years. So that's a little misleading, but still, I mean, huge winning percentage. And this is the first time ever that Penn State will open on a Thursday night. Only the 11th time that they've opened not on a Saturday, and the first time ever on a Thursday. So it's a couple of stats there.
Yeah, who are we? Alabama playing all these cupcakes early,
It seems like it.
Oh yeah, that's some interesting stats that I've not heard, or that's a pretty impressive record there in season openers. So, if we base it off the stats, that's a good sign for us. Zach, what do you think about opening on a Thursday night?
So the Thursday angle is definitely interesting. And I think something that I can't recall Penn State playing on a Thursday. It's possible that they have. I think the opening on the road in the Big Ten in a Big Ten game is something that we're a little bit familiar with because Penn State did it last year, going to Wisconsin and playing what felt like a really big game in the opening weekend. And if anybody listening to this is obviously a big college football fan, so the beauty of college football is that you feel like you have to go 12-0, especially with your Big Ten games, your conference games. You feel like you can't afford to slip up because perhaps you lose a chance then, even with one loss, of getting into the Big Ten conference game, which you kind of need unless you're Ohio State to get to the playoffs. So you just jump right out of the gate week one with a game that is basically a must win, or feels kind of like a must win. Is something, to Devin's point about how the way a lot of teams have historically scheduled, that a lot of fans just you just come out of the gate. I know last year with that Wisconsin game, it was a nail biter right down to the end, and it felt like a late season important Big Ten game, which it was, and which I think this one will be too, because one thing I think we'll get into is that this is going to be a big game for Purdue. Obviously, with them playing in the West, they have Ohio State and Michigan right where they want them, not on the schedule. So that's huge. So they've got Penn State, Indiana, Maryland out of the East, and then all of their normal Big Ten West teams. So, I'm kind of jumping the gun here a bit, I guess. But if you're Purdue, this is a huge game because you look at your schedule, and this is probably the one that you have circled, at least in the early part. So, yeah, the Thursday part's a little weird. I think Penn State, Devin can maybe check me on this. I think they played Illinois out there in a Friday night game, maybe like 3 years ago or something. But I don't know if they've ever played a Thursday night game. So that'll be a little different.
Yeah,
I'm trying to double check that right now. I don't remember them playing Thursday, but just trying to see if I can find something.
I think it was Illinois, because in the last couple of years, the Big Ten has played some Friday night games, and it created a big stink with a lot of the schools. I think Penn State actually said we refuse to play at
to
home.
host.
I think
Yeah.
Ohio State maybe said we refuse to play on Friday night at all, because we've got, for the big thing for the coaching staffs is we want to be out recruiting high school on Thursday night and Friday night. And so that's sort of a problem for them. And just the logistics of trying to get 100,000 people into State College I know I'm going off topic here, but trying to get 100,000 people into State College on a Friday night for a big game like that would just be crazy.
It'd be a nightmare.
Yeah.
But from a student standpoint, that would have been awesome. A Friday night game, have the whole weekend to, continue as usual. So,
and I think the one thing, again, the Thursday part of it's a little weird, but if you look at the schedule, you've got the backyard brawl, and I think at 7, and I think you've got the Penn State Purdue game starting at 8. So from a brand PR standpoint, I think the uniqueness of it is there's not a lot of the other games on. So a lot of college football fans are going to be tuning in. So if you come out of the gate with a big win against on the road against a Big Ten team in a game that a lot of people are going to be watching, just because there's not a lot of other options on that's a good way to jumpstart the season, I think, if you're Penn State or Purdue.
And the fact that it's, before you go there, Jordan, and the fact that it's on like broadcast Fox, it's not on ESPN2 or Big Ten Network. Like it's on Fox, that is in every single household in America. So like you said, it's going to be the number one watched game on Thursday night. Pitt, West Virginia might be close there, but I would be shocked if rating wise Penn State Purdue is not the number one game of the evening.
Well, if Pitt's projected to be in the college football playoff, that's pretty big.
Desmond Howard's going to be tuning in.
Hey, Desmond.
So, that's all I wanted to say about that. I was chomping at the bit to put that little bit in there. So let's move on to Penn State versus Purdue. Let's take a look at our offenses. I'll lead things off with our offensive line. We have two solid returning starters in Juice Scruggs, which is Zach would say all-time name list right there. And then Caden Wallace. They both played a lot of snaps last year. So I think our offensive line should improve in some aspects. Thank you. That's how we got
good assets on the offensive line.
Yeah, good assets on the offensive line. Exactly. So Juice Scruggs is moving to center, which that has me a little worried. To me, the center obviously is one of the most important positions on the offensive line. You're touching the ball every snap. So that's a little worrisome, moving somebody over there and not, having enough depth in our recruiting to, fill that gap. But the coaching staff seems to think that he's going to be that guy. So I'll turn it over to either you two if you want to touch on the offensive line at all.
If you want to, Zach, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. I'll just the name that I look at is, if you follow recruiting, just noteworthy, Landon Tengwall is a redshirt freshman, and I don't remember how highly he was recruited, but he was a really high, probably one of the higher recruited or higher rated recruits from an offensive line standpoint that Franklin's had in his tenure.
He got a 4-star recruit. He was the number one recruit out of Maryland, though, I believe.
Yeah, and he was a true freshman last year, and if you recall, I think it was the Rutgers week where like half the team was sick and didn't practice, and so there was a lot of people in and out. I think he saw time that game and really performed well. So I think that's a kid that they have a lot of high hopes for. That, again, we talked about this last week, just from a recruiting standpoint, just from an offensive line standpoint, that if you're Franklin, if you're Penn State, you feel like you got to start to hit on some of these, high-powered offensive line recruits, because that, frankly, if you're Alabama, Ohio State, Georgia, that's the secret. Everybody talks about the quarterbacks and receivers, but those programs are pumping offensive linemen into the NFL every year. So Tengwall's a name of a kid, I think, that you'd like to see him come out of the gate and really take over one of those guard positions and just dominate. I know he's a little young, but that's something to watch for that I'm going to be looking at.
Yeah. Other than Scruggs and Wallace, I hate to say that there's a lot of questions, but there is. I mean, nobody else has more than one career start on the offensive line, and that's always a concern for a team that last year was far from perfect with the offensive line. I think it's interesting that the coach Trotwine, I think how you say his last name, it's his third season now as specifically the offensive line coach, and he was named to the 35 under 35 list this past season of coaches to be on the lookout for. So it's time that the offensive line really steps up, and hopefully some of these other guys, like you said, Tengwall, Dawkins, Fashanu, any of these guys really got to step up.
Yeah, and one other person, I know you said on the offensive line, people who haven't started. We do actually have another person who started in Hunter Norzard. Is that how you pronounce that name? He was a transfer in from Cornell, I believe, and he was second team All-American last year. So
yeah, and it's interesting that he has not won a starting job. So I think that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, that's everything I've seen. I mean, obviously we don't have the official depth chart and who's going to be starting, but I have not seen his name actually populate on any of the projected depth charts. So Zach, you have anything you want to say?
No, I mean, as far as the offensive line, I think we've covered it. I think it's also one of those position groups where, frankly, the less that the fan base is hearing these names, the better, right? And it's unfortunate
true.
if you're an offensive lineman that you'd love to say these guys are out there just dominating. And I don't even think Penn State's necessarily in looking for dominance at the offensive line position. It's more just solid pass blocking. Let's protect the quarterback and let's get a consistent push. So we have that stable, reliable running game that we talked about last week. That, look, we're not looking for, to lead the country in rushing yards. We need to see consistency and the ability. I think for me, the biggest thing I look for is, can you pick up a yard or two in those 3rd and 1, 3rd and 2, 4th and 1? That it just feels like year in, year out, those situations have just vexed Penn State. Can we finally have a offensive line where we feel like 3rd and 1, we can just line up and blast it straight ahead and we're going to get it? I don't know about, everybody listening to this, but that's something for me that over the years, you never feel good about that. And that's with, NFL running backs in the backfield, even the Saquon Barkley, Miles Sanders era. Journey Brown, I think, would have been an NFL running back if not for the medical issue, where, like, how do you not feel like we can just pick up a yard when you have guys like that in the backfield? But I don't know about you. For me, I've always just kind of struggled in those situations. It just doesn't feel good. And I think, if we could ever get in a situation where you just know they're going to pick it up, that's what I'm looking for.
Yeah, and to hit on that too, we'll transition right into Penn State running backs. A lot of that has been play calling as well, and not getting the ball into the hands of our running backs. So I actually saw some stats here. The 2016 Saquon Barkley had 300 total touches, 272 rushes, 28 receptions. He had 22 TDs. 2017, similar numbers, a little bit lower on the touches running wise, 217 rushes, 54 receptions, 221 touchdowns. Sorry, just 21. Miles Sanders, 220 rushes, 24 receptions, 244. So we're just trending down every year. 2019, even Journey Brown, he had a pretty decent season. He only had 141 total touches, 13 TDs though. And then the last 2 years, Kevon Lee has been our leading rusher with 101 total touches for 4 TDs and 123 touches for 2 TDs last year. So something needs to change with establishing a run game and maybe figuring out early, hey, these are going to be our 2 running backs. Like, they may split time, but they need to be getting those touches, which I think last year we just kind of were spreading the ball around too much between the running backs and not really letting anybody get into a rhythm. I don't know if you guys saw that, or that's just my take on it.
Yeah, I think that was a common theme that you saw from commentators and pundits and bloggers. Was just, it just never felt like, there was moments where it was like John Lovett might be the guy. I think he had some moments. Noah Cain was always the guy that was, because he came out of the gate as a true freshman in 2019 and just had some really good games and got hurt. And I think you never saw the burst that he had pre-injury. And so it just kind of fell into, I'm trying to think who, with Kevon Lee, Lovett, Cain. I think there was Ford's the fourth guy, and he's had some moments. I think he's a little bit maybe quicker, a little bit better out of the backfield, but just, never really grabbed the bull by the horn, so to speak. And so Kevon Lee kind of ended up being the guy, mostly I think because he was like the one of that bunch that you could rely on to fall forward, to carry guys forward a little bit. But it's been well documented with Lee. He just doesn't have the speed. So last year it just kind of felt like it was just moving pieces around, trying guys out until someone grabbed the position, and nobody ever really did. And they just have different skill sets that make them nice pieces, but nobody is that guy that has all of those skill sets. When we talked about this last week, we'd love to see a Nick Singleton or a Katron Allen, just come out of the gate and say, it's going to be my job. I can run, I can catch out of the backfield, and I can pass block. And
give me the rock, coach. Yeah, and that's kind of the feeling. I know some people who are listening are probably like, oh, these guys just all agree with each other all the time. But I do think watching a lot of game film, like, we have seen those trends continue the last couple of years. And I have high hopes for our running back core this year. But typically running backs, unless you're NFL level running back, which I don't know if any of these guys are yet, like, you're only as good as your offensive line. So hopefully the offensive line improves. We see that improvement in the running game. and that could open up the passing game for Clifford. So I just wanted to hit on Purdue's offensive line, and surprisingly, as bad as our offensive line was last year, Purdue's might have been a little bit worse. They had absolutely no running game last year at all. That's why their quarterback almost like led the league in passing yards. Just they completely abandoned their running game. So I did a little bit of research on them. Their left guard, Spencer Hostage, and their center, Gus Hartwig, are the only two that are back as full-time starters, but they've actually combined for 48 starts together, including 39 last season side by side together. So they do have some returning that could, produce that experience they need on the offensive line and maybe improve their running game a little bit. But their last year offensive line held up decent pass protection, but they struggled massively on the running game. So that'll be something to see moving forward, to see if they can continue to protect Aiden O'Connell. So I don't know if you guys have anything you want to touch on with Purdue's offensive line, and then we'll talk about their rushing game a little bit too.
Yeah, I think that as many questions as I have about Penn State's offensive line and the running game in general, Purdue has even more question marks. Penn State averaged 108 rushing yards per game last year. Purdue averaged 84. They were 127th in college football last year. And like you said, I mean, they relied so heavily on Aiden O'Connell, which I'm sure we'll get into here in a few minutes. But if Penn State is able to only bring a little bit of pressure and drop people back into coverage because they're still getting pressure in the running game, it opens up a lot of things that Penn State can do on defense. So I think the offensive line of Purdue is going to be a huge question going into this season, other than Hartwig and what was the other guy's name? I forget it. Holstage. But it's definitely a lot of questions. They're going to start a redshirt freshman probably. It's always sketchy to start a redshirt freshman on the offensive line, in my opinion. But I mean, if you're good enough, you're good enough. So.
Yeah, they may not just have the depth, to play anybody else there, and he gives them the best option to succeed. So
looking at their depth chart, I mean, it looks pretty bare there on the offensive line. They have behind Hartwig at center, it literally has a question mark.
Yeah.
So I don't what happens there. That's probably not good.
And
a good sign.
I have a lot of respect for Purdue as a program. It is tough for a smaller Big Ten program to recruit at a high level. I mean, it really is. So I think they have talent there. Do they have, the same talent as Penn State's bringing in? No, but, on any given Saturday, they could show up. So I think we definitely need to respect Purdue coming in, because that could be a lot closer than some people may be thinking. But I'll just touch on their running backs. They're going to be running back by committee. Their coaching staff has already, said that they claim they have basically a 3-headed monster, essentially, is what I read in one article. And that could just be, a little bit of homer bias there. But their starters are going to be King Daru, which I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. Kobe Lewis, which was a transfer from Central Michigan. He's a junior. Transfer from Central Michigan, and he was actually injured all of last year, so he didn't actually play. But the year before, he had a 1,000-yard season. So he's a 5'11", 220-pound back. So sounds like he could be pretty quick and agile. But we'll have to see. I really don't know too much about their running backs other than what I've just read online. So I didn't really watch a lot of Purdue game tape. So.
Especially with all the questions in the running back game. I mean, King Daru was their starter last year, averaged like 3.7 yards per carry. Again, we just talked about the offensive line. So the running is just a huge question mark, I think.
Yeah, 3 yards in a cloud of smoke will do it, though,
Oh, well, Kevon Lee averaged 5 yards a carry. I was shocked to see that. So
that absolutely shatters my universe.
4.9 yards per carry last year.
That's wild.
Yeah.
Zach, what do you have to say about it? I can see you had something.
Yeah. So first thing is Gus Hartwig is a first team all name division for an offensive lineman. I feel like you have to be an offensive lineman if you're Gus. But so I'm interested, while we're talking Purdue offensive line, Purdue offense, Penn State defense, that part of the matchup. we've heard that Manny Diaz is aggressive. He's going to blitz a lot. He's not going to kind of just sit in the base 4-3 that perhaps a lot of Penn State fans are used to. So I think, what Purdue wants to do. You saw who they were last year. So they've got a veteran quarterback. I think they like some of their receivers and tight ends. So, is it going to be, they're just going to come out and throw, and Penn State expects it, and we bring a lot of pressure, and you've heard so much confidence and faith in Porter Jr. and Kalen King and Daquan Hardy. And do you just put that offensive line and those question marks that Jordan and Devin were talking about, just come right at them, and play aggressive defensively, and see if your secondary is as good as you think it is, and just trust that they're not really going to run the ball. So that's something I'm going to be looking for, is just sort of who does Purdue think they are? Do they think maybe we're going to be able to run the ball this year? Or do we just come out and we know who we are, and we know what we're about, and we just sling the ball 50 or 55 times with Aiden O'Connell? That'll be something to watch. And I think when we're talking Purdue offense and Penn State defense.
Yeah, and that's all good stuff. I think the issue with coming out and just slinging is, who the hell is he going to throw it to? Because they really, don't have many options at wide receiver. So that's something to note. I think if we're talking advantage offensive line, I think Penn State has an advantage to Purdue's offensive line. I think that's pretty clear cut. I think receiving core, we have an advantage. Tight ends, I mean, where do we even start with our tight ends? We can talk a little bit in depth about our tight ends, because I think they have potential to be very good this year. So, I mean, they were great last year. Devin, you want to talk about tight ends a little bit?
Yeah, I'm really excited to see what happens with our tight ends this year. I think that they have a ton of potential. Brenton Strange looked really good at times last year, and obviously he'll be back. He's already had 18 starts. He's a redshirt junior. Started every game last year. Had 20 catches, 3 touchdowns, and then you add in, if Strange is struggling or is not getting the matchups that they want, then you add in Theo Johnson. You add in Tyler Warren. Tyler Warren did a little bit of everything, had the Wildcat package set up for him, which is kind of crazy to think about a tight end being your Wildcat quarterback. But either way, I think that all 3 of them are going to be big factors this year in the Big Ten, and I'm sure Zach would love for us to run some 2 tight end sets. I don't know how often that's going to happen, but that would be pretty sweet to see, because we have them. We might as well use them.
Yeah, and we're talking about, we really have 3 tight ends that could probably start on a majority of other Big Ten teams. Maybe not the elite teams like Ohio State, Michigan, but some of the other teams, like, you're looking at these guys, all 3 could start for different programs. So to have 3 options at tight end, and they're all very versatile and different. We have Brent Strange, really great pass catcher. Tyler Warren did it all last year, and then you also have Theo, who can block and do passing or pass catching as well. So Zach, what do you want to say about our tight end situation?
Yeah, I think it. The challenge is, if you're Mike Yurcik, the offensive coordinator, is you've got to make a commitment to really try to get the tight ends involved in the passing game. I don't have the stats in front of me, but it felt like last year that, I know Devin just referenced, I think Strange had like 20 catches or so. I'm guessing he probably had more than Theo Johnson, and I'm sure he had more than Tyler Warren. But I'd in a perfect world, I'd love to say at the end of the season, those 3 guys combined for 60 receptions or something along those lines, maybe 10 touchdowns, because you've got the size, you've got, I look at Theo Johnson and I'm just waiting for this guy to take off. I think Strange is a good, solid football player. I think maybe he doesn't have like sort of the top end speed. Not that most tight ends are super fast, but Theo Johnson seems like the guy that just kind of has the whole package. He's a mountain of a man. He seems like he's got really good hands. One thing we don't really see is necessarily like how we're not really paying attention as much to like how these guys are blocking in the run game. But it just seems like Theo Johnson's the guy that should just take over. But if you're Yurcik, you got to make a commitment to get the tight ends involved, because I think a lot of times, maybe last year too, with Jahan Dotson, that's Clifford's security blanket, where if you're not making an effort to get the tight ends involved, they just kind of fall out of the passing game. So that's something I want to look to see, is are we drawing stuff up to put these guys in a position to succeed?
Yeah, I agree. And with Yurcik coming in last year as his first year, we don't really know the inner workings of how much liberty he had with the playbook with Franklin. They might have been on more probationary status, like, hey, I want you to kind of run these sets, these types of plays. Like, you can pick and choose game time, what's going on, but like, stick to our plan. Where this year, he's coming back. We did not have a very good, successful running game last year, or really offense in general. So maybe he has a little bit more liberty to kind of take charge, is what I'm hoping. And I have high hopes for our offense this year. I think we could really establish a good running game if those guys can get moving, and that could really open up a lot of passing opportunities, especially for those tight ends coming off, those screen blocks where they, block for a couple seconds and release. Like, you could look at those guys getting downfield. They have the capability to, make catches and run. So I'm hoping that's kind of what we see. And, maybe we get up enough in the first half or late in the second where we can kind of experiment a little bit with some unorthodox play calls for the typical James Franklin offense, is what I'll say.
And I think too, like, it's one of those things where you hate to say anything that sounds like you'll be better off without like a Jahan Dotson, because that's not what I'm about to say. But you could tell Clifford, just like when anything broke down or that's they were force feeding him the ball, and why not, right? That's like coaching 101. If you've got players that are better than the other side has, use
exploit them. Yeah.
But I think maybe this year with Parker Washington, Tinsley, Keandre Lambert-Smith, if he's your third option receiver, I think that's a good situation. We've got a couple tight ends that we've already talked about. So it could be one of those systems where you've got 4 or 5 guys that are all catching multiple passes a game. And it's a lot harder for the defense to just say, okay, Dotson's going to get 15 targets. So we gotta really lock down on him. And the Penn State can perhaps spread the ball around and just make it a multifaceted offense where you've got to pay attention to everybody. Because I think when you can do that in any sport, it doesn't matter if it's basketball or football, or if you've got multiple weapons that other teams have to account for, it just opens things up.
Yeah. And I'm definitely going to clip that. So it says, I think we're better off without Jahan Dotson, and that's going to be your intro on the podcast.
Fake news.
It's doctored. Go ahead,
Devin. Zach, to go back to what you were just saying, I thought you brought up a really interesting point about the whole security blanket idea, and it's so true that anytime Clifford was in trouble, he just throw it and hope Jahan Dotson would catch it.
And he did.
And he usually did. But is Parker Washington that security blanket? I don't know quite yet. So having these tight ends, I think, could be a big difference maker to say, Washington's not open, Tinsley's not open, going through your progressions and having a guy like Theo Johnson or Brenton Strange as your third option in your checklist, I think could be a huge advantage. And just one more name, we mentioned him already. I think Nick Singleton is going to be a really good receiving running back. I think some of those plays that Penn State like to run with Saquon, like the wheel route, I think of that wheel route touchdown that he had, that's pretty iconic. I think those are plays that Yurcik can reincorporate from Penn State history that Nick Singleton will be really good at. It's stuff that Governor Mifflin tried to do a little bit with him, and he caught a lot of passes in high school. Obviously, going from Lancaster Lebanon League football to the Big Ten is a huge difference. I'm just saying, I think he will be another name to catch some passes. And while we're on the receivers, I just saw a stat here that I thought, Jordan, you would really appreciate it. Penn State's one of only 4 Power 5 programs that has 2 players with 100 career receptions, because Tinsley has 130 and Washington already has over 100. I think he has 117 or something like that.
That's pretty crazy.
Yeah, there's only 4 Power 5 programs that have 2 receivers back with over 100 receptions. I know Tinsley's a transfer, so it's kind of crazy.
Yeah, still counts.
So I mean, it's a lot of safety guys to throw to that should be able to catch the ball.
Yeah. And when you're talking about, a safety net, you're making your progression. Guess what? That tight end, most of the time, he's going to be lined up with against the linebacker. And with the athleticism and the recruiting of Purdue, I don't think they'll be able to, safely, guard them all the time. So you could see some big receptions to these tight ends, being lined up on a linebacker. And same goes for Singleton coming out of the backfield. Most of the time, the outside linebacker is going to be picking him up coming out of the backfield. So, that those wheel routes were some of my favorite plays that Penn State ran, and they ran them successfully with Barkley on multiple times. Specifically, I remember being at the Big Ten championship in 2016 when he caught that touchdown on the wheel route, but we had ran that multiple times prior to those games. And same with Miles Sanders, another phenomenal catching running back. Right. I mean, they still run those plays in the NFL with the Eagles. You see him catching balls out of the backfield all the time. So I think Singleton could be that guy, and hopefully we can scheme him into some openings where he can, get into the open field and really show us what he has.
One name, if I can, just to throw out for on the Purdue side of the ball while we're talking tight ends, is I know Purdue really likes their senior tight end, Payne Durham. This guy that had 45 receptions for 467 yards last year and 6 touchdowns. And like in the Wisconsin game, he had 9 catches, 112 yards, and a touchdown, and he ended the season strong. Purdue actually had a really interesting 48-45 overtime win over Tennessee in their bowl game. And in that game, he had 5 catches, 85 yards, and 2 touchdowns. So I think Jordan mentioned earlier about, I think their top 3 receivers from last year are all gone for different reasons, but they've got a tight end back that caught 45 passes and 6 touchdowns. So that's somebody, if you're Penn State on the defensive side of the ball, and we'll probably talk about this with the youth and inexperience at linebacker, that if this guy's having a huge game, it could spell trouble for Penn State.
Yeah, we can transition right into the defense. I'm going to be honest, I'm going to have to step back a little bit on the defense. I don't have quite the knowledge on everybody coming in and coming out as I'd like so far. So I'll turn it over to you guys if you want to talk about the linebacking core.
If you're a Penn State fan, it's got to start and end with the season with Curtis Jacobs at the linebacking position. Number 23, a guy that you got to expect will probably lead the team in tackles with Ellis Brooks and Brandon Smith onto the NFL, whatever their flaws might have been. He had a pretty reliable, athletic linebacking core last year at the middle linebacker position. I don't know if it's been announced or not, but I think Tyler Elsdon is the guy who's gonna win that job. But I know a young kid, I think a redshirt freshman, Kobe King, was involved in that. And at the other outside linebacker spot, you got Jonathan Sutherland, who he's been a special teams ace for Penn State, but I think there's a lot of question marks about whether he can make that step up. He might be bulked up, but he's played safety, but moving to the outside linebacker position, that seems like a question mark where you'd expect Penn State to have some young, up and coming, highly recruited guy to fill that role, but it appears that hasn't really happened. So we'll see. I think, again, it all comes back to you got to have Curtis Jacobs out there on, all 3 downs. And if he's having a big year, it's probably a good thing for Penn State. If he gets banged up or isn't playing well, all of a sudden you've got problems galore at the linebacker spot.
Yeah, I think Jonathan Sutherland, I'm glad you brought him up. I think that's a really interesting person for me this year. Like you said, he's done some really great things on special teams over the last few years. He's played in 45 career games, which is a lot of games. I mean, it's not what Sean Clifford's played in, but I don't know. Actually, off the top of my head, just making a joke how old he is, but still 45 games for Jonathan.
Senior.
Yeah, he's
one for each year. He is old, right?
Right. But anyway, seeing what he does now as a starter in the linebackers after playing mostly secondary and cornerback the last few years, I don't know what to expect from him, how he'll fit into that role. I think Tyler Elsdon, like you mentioned, I think he has a chance to be really good. I just don't know if he's going to be really good this year. I think he's going to make mistakes. He's going to have issues. I think he's just figuring out what to do. He did play a little bit last year. I think I saw he got into 10 or 11 games last year, had like 12, 15 tackles. Especially late in the year against Arkansas, he had 6. So he's getting there. And then a kid from kind of near where we all are from, Charlie Katcher. If he is kind of your second string guy, it's a little worrisome to me because he's just not, I don't think he's really ready, even though he's a senior. Like he's not a consistent tackling linebacker. He's a great player to be around, I'm sure, and a great vocal guy, but I don't know if I'm worried if I see him out there too much. That I think that could be an issue because that means we don't know what we are as a linebacking team. So
yeah, I think Elsdon is a kid that just from like sort of the looking at his bio sheet. So he's from North Schuylkill. So he's a coal country kid. He's kind of got the right, he's like 6'2", 230. He just has that, he has that build that kind of puts you to mind of like a Sean Lee or a Dan Connor.
That's a Paterno linebacker. If I
Exactly.
Yeah, he just has that look, and fair or not, that comes with high expectations. So, when you think of Penn State, obviously you think of linebackers. So these guys are going to have to step up, because in the Big Ten, especially, you've got a lot of teams that want to run the ball, that want to pound the ball, that want to throw it to the tight ends. That it's just, and Purdue will be a good example. We just talked about their tight end Payne Durham, who I think he's going to be the guy that they try to force feed. So right out of the gate, the linebackers are going to be, they're going to be tasked with a tough job. I do think, like we talked about last week with Manny Diaz, that Sutherland might not really be an every down guy. I think with the depth in the secondary, especially with the way Purdue wants to line up, I anticipate they're going to be in 3 receiver sets a lot. You're going to see Daquan Hardy, Kalen King, and Joey Porter Jr. all out there at the corner position a lot. So, I'm anticipating, especially again with the Purdue game, take a linebacker off the field, put another corner on, and probably play sort of like a 4-2-5 as like your base defense. That's something, again, with Manny Diaz, that I'm expecting, get a little bit maybe smaller, faster, and you can get a little more aggressive and give you some different looks with the blitz package. So we'll see. But regardless of 4-3, 4-2-5, the linebacking position is massively important. So these guys are going to have to step up no matter who the opponent is, or no matter what the style of play is.
Yeah, and like you said, our linebackers are going to be tested right out the gate. So, it's going to come down to those individual matchups, who can get it done. So it'll be a good test. I'm always a bit nervous starting conference play the first week. You don't really get to get your feet underneath you, going on the road, a not typical night you're playing. It's just kind of weird. So I'm hoping they come prepared, is what I'm hoping. And that goes for the defense and the linebackers especially. It's going to be weird playing a Thursday night game on the road at Purdue, for some of these guys' first game starting. So, Devin, you got anything with the linebackers?
No, I think we pretty much hit on everything, like you said. Just a lot of questions, and I think Nick or Zach bringing up that Penn State could be in a nickel type package makes a lot of sense for what they have. So hopefully Joey Porter doesn't commit 15 pass interference penalties a game like last year, because he's just too good to commit so many stupid penalties. So hopefully he improves that a lot.
Yeah, do you guys we can segue into the secondary and talk about that a little bit. We lost some really outstanding players and guys like Ebiketie, who are just, they were everywhere last year, and big turnovers and big games, just guys that are you don't see come around a lot. So I think we're gonna have a hard time filling those gaps,
especially against Aiden O'Connell, who's gonna throw it a ton.
Yeah.
They're gonna have to step up. But I actually think that of the 3 levels of defense, I probably have my least concern about the secondary, which is kind of crazy to me. There's so many questions. So at linebacker, the line behind Mustipher, I'm still a little confused on who's going to end up winning jobs and who's going to play a lot. But I feel like I trust Porter, Brown, Ellis, and Hardy, and then adding in Kalen King, the freshman. I feel pretty okay there. I don't know about you, Zach, but
yeah, I think if Penn State is seeing games, and again, Purdue's can be right out of the gate, they're probably going to throw it a lot. And so if you're seeing the secondary struggle, that could be a sign of bad things to come, because I think, again, there's question marks elsewhere. So if the secondary is not locked down, I mean, it works both ways, but the best friend of a defensive line is good cornerbacks that can lock things down, and vice versa. A great pass rush is what you need if you're a secondary. But I mean, Porter Jr. is going to come out because of just his body size and his shape and what he can do. He's probably going to have a lot of first round hype. Jordan, I think it was Jordan that referenced the penalties. There was a lot of penalties last year. He's very aggressive, and you want to see that in a cornerback, and you want him to have a short memory. But there's a lot of penalties, so he's just got to watch that. Kalen King, they really like, and then I think Daquan Hardy was like an unsung hero last year. Mostly, I think, playing out of the slot corner. But I know he had an interception return for a touchdown against Michigan State. you can't talk about Penn State secondary last year without, getting into detail on Jaquan Brisker. But what I think is interesting is, so Brisker had 2 interceptions and a fumble recovery. Jair Brown, who's back and who's going to probably be locking things down at the free safety position. This guy had 6 interceptions last year, 1 return for a touchdown. I think it was Maryland. And then he forced a fumble and had 2 fumble recoveries. So is that maybe teams were scared of Brisker and they were staying away and they were attacking Brown? I don't know, but I think just from a statistic standpoint, he had a good year last year, and it'll be interesting to see what he can do now with Brisker on to the NFL. Is there, Keaton Ellis, or I think Zakee Wheatley is the other guy that's going to factor into that other safety spot. Can they plug right in and give you what Brisker gave you? Probably not, but is this, one of those situations where Jair Brown has that big leap and now he has a Jaquan Brisker type year and the other guy just needs to kind of lock things down and be there? That's for me. That's what I'm going to look for. Is I think Brown can have a huge year, and just can we just lock down the other safety spot and let Brown be a ball hawk and do what he did last year?
Yeah, I mean, all great points. Like I said, our defense was just very unique last year, and some of those plays where they're staying away from Brisker, throwing towards Brown, I don't know if we'll see similar stuff to that. And Brown is probably going to be the number 1 guy back there. So maybe they're going to try and avoid him, knowing his reputation after last year. So it's just something to kind of look at. Let's move on. We're getting kind of shorter here on time, but let's just talk briefly about our special teams. I know we lost a, really great punter in Jordan Stout last year. He's playing in the NFL for the Baltimore Ravens, I believe.
I think so.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's going to be hard to replace those awesome punts where we're literally flipping the field every time. Like, just really great. And those kickoffs. So, I don't know if either of you guys have any information on the special team side.
Jordan, not to backtrack, but I did want to hit a couple Purdue defenders before we get into the special teams. Just a couple names to be on the lookout for. Kieran, I believe it's Kieran. I definitely could be wrong. Kieran Douglas, linebacker for Purdue, wears number 43. 3rd on the team in tackles last year. He's going to be all over the field. He's probably their best defensive player. And then in the secondary, Cam Allen's back. He'll be, I think, a 3rd-year starter, if not a 4th-year starter. I could be wrong on that, but I believe he's at least a 3rd-year starter. He had 65 tackles last year, 4 interceptions, and 4 pass breakups. So those are a couple guys that will be big impact players for Purdue's defense. And then probably the next best is Jalen Graham, another secondary guy. He kind of is that hybrid linebacker corner position that a lot of teams like to use. So those are a couple guys that I'm looking at. And then Zach, if you want to go into special teams, I'll let you take that one over.
Yeah, I think, and we talked about this a little bit last week, but Stout was a great punter. I think he's going to have a good career in the NFL. I think I saw a highlight. He just boomed like an 80-yard punt or something in the preseason. But we talked about, was it maybe too much to say, hey, you're the kickoff guy, you're the punter, you're the place kicker. And so last year I don't have the stats in front of me, but he was not as great at the field goal kicking department as you'd like to see. I know we missed a couple extra points and some shorter field goals the Michigan game. But Jake Pinniger is a guy who had kicked for Penn State before, and I think my expectation is that he's going to be the kicker and that he should have a decent year. This isn't a brand new guy. I'm not exactly sure actually who will be doing the punting duties, but I do know that Eli Manning was on campus here recently to break the news that this guy got a scholarship. I don't know, Devin, if you have a name there, but whoever he is,
Alex Bashetta, I believe is how you pronounce it. I believe
he's going to have huge shoes to fill because Stout was unquestionably really good last year. And talking about earlier when I mentioned a pass rush and a secondary and how they kind of coexist and rely on each other, there's nothing better for a good defense than a great punter. That was kind of like a Paterno thing that you always saw back in the day was if you've got a great punter, it makes those 4th and 3 calls a little bit easier where okay, we're going to get off a great punt. We've got a reliable defense, and you just kind of like parlay those things together. So, it's a sort of an unsung area, but late in games when you have a terrible punt, and I'm thinking back to the early years of the Franklin era, there, and I don't remember any names, but there were some games that Penn State lost just because the defense was doing everything it could, and you'd have bad punts that would just put the defense in a poor spot. So we'll see how Bichetta can do filling in for Jordan Stout.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to, see if those shoes can be filled, and hopefully, we can continue this tradition of having a really good punter, or at least a punter that can, help our defense out, especially with sometimes how we play call on the offense. Those guys are not getting a lot of rest. So, if they can, scheme putting them into better positions based off the field position, that's a big help. So,
Yep, and for Purdue, they'll have Mitchell Finneran back as their kicker. He was their kicker last year, 24 of 29 on field goals last year, so pretty reliable. He's a fifth year. He transferred in from I don't remember, some D2 school. So he's back as their place kicker, and then they'll have Jack Ansel back as their punter. He started every game last year, averages about 38 yards per punt. And had
that sounds kind of terrible, right? 38 yards.
38 isn't, it's not great, but it's definitely far from terrible. He had 13 punts inside the 20, and the opponent's fair caught 23 of his punts. Out of his 44 punts, he had 23 that were fair caught. So I think that's maybe why that average is so low.
Shorter.
And without, obviously,
higher.
I haven't gone back and rewatched him. I'm just looking at stats and trying to remember that. Like Zach said, the bowl game was pretty crazy. So I don't even remember if he punted in that game at all.
Probably not.
48 points, he may not have, but you got to remember too, Jordan, the punting average doesn't include the like 12 yards from what the center snaps it back to. And so you have a lot of, sometimes you'll punt from the 50 too, and you're only punting it and it'll go in the end zone and it's a touchback. So it's only like 30 yards, but just to defend this poor guy's honor. But yeah, one thing while we're talking special teams, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I'm looking to see who's going to be returning kicks for Penn State. I know from a punt return standpoint, you had Dotson back there a lot last year. And I'm trying to think the last time Penn State returned a kick for a touchdown. It feels like it's been a while.
Saquon Barkley against Indiana.
Ohio State.
Oh yeah, Ohio State. Yeah.
And that would have been 17 against Ohio State to open that game.
I was thinking the Indiana
I know
game.
We said we won't talk about 2017, but
here we are
to open that game with a kickoff return for a touchdown. And I think we were up by 16 or at some point, and to not close that out is just nightmare fuel. So thanks. Now I won't be able to sleep tonight, but yeah, I'm looking to see maybe Singleton.
This all night.
I haven't really heard, maybe you guys have read or heard snippets from camp, but I don't know, maybe Singleton, maybe Katron Allen are guys that they're going to put
I did see Singleton's name on the short list for kick returns.
And I saw Alvin Ford as an option because he's not getting any carries. And then punt return sounds like it might end up being Tinsley, the transfer, unless he's getting a ton of offensive
snaps.
Snaps. And then it'll probably end up sliding back Daquan Hardy from his corner safety.
I did see just while we mentioned Tinsley, I did see he's wearing number 5. So he's just really leaning into the hey, I got to replace Jahan Dotson. So part of me says I really respect that.
I do too.
I'm just going to be that guy. I'm just going to wear his number. I'm going to be him. So I tip my cap to him. Hopefully it works out for him.
And he's going to get a lot of fans week 1. Yeah. If he plays well and he's wearing Jahan Dotson's number that everyone already owns the jerseys from the last 3 years, he's going to have a lot of fans right away.
I mean, statistically, he had a better year than Dotson last year, right?
So, true.
It's one way to look at it.
Playing the MAC.
Yeah.
Whatever.
So let's just do a quick, prediction for the score. And I'll just start. I think we get it done. I know we did our season projections already, which, now's the opportunity to change those if you want, but I really think we come out and I think we take care of business on the defensive side. I saw some people projecting us losing 37-34, and I just don't see us giving up more than 30 points. So I think it's going to be 21-31 Penn State.
That's pretty close to what I was thinking too there, Jordo. I was thinking Penn State 27-13. I'll go 27-13. I think our defense comes to play.
And I've got Penn State 30-21. So I think it might be
Alright.
pretty close to what Jordan had, but I
I said
think Purdue.
31.
Yeah, I think Purdue, they're going to be able to move the ball, and I think they're going to score. It's just a question of, I think Penn State, like offensively, you just want to see them come out and run the ball and just kind of on the road get a lead and not look back. But I do think it'll be a ball game late.
Yeah, I don't think we come out and are up big at halftime. I would say I think we'll probably be up 3 points at halftime, if not maybe a score. Just depends on if we can get that running game established, and how good is Purdue really, because we don't know. Like, we don't know either team.
Week 1, we don't really know anything about anyone.
Yeah, so it's kind of a crapshoot. So I'm totally okay, saying that it'll be a close game early, but I think we get it done. I just historically I've not seen us lose in week 1 under James Franklin, and I know we sometimes play not great opponents, but
Nobody's.
I'm just saying.
We also, while you mentioned historically, Penn State probably as good. The record against Purdue and since they've joined the Big Ten is probably as good as anybody not named Rutgers or Maryland, but Penn State is historically 15-2 against Purdue since they joined the Big Ten. They played a couple times in the 50s. It was so long ago, kind of doesn't matter. But yeah, Purdue won in 03 and 04. Oddly enough, Penn State beat Drew Brees both times they played him in 99 and 2000s. But the other thing I always look at too, if I can, I'll try to be quick, but the conferences, the Big Ten, like most conferences, have gotten so large that some of these teams so rarely see each other. So Penn State being in the East and Purdue being in the West, this will only be Penn State's 3rd trip to West Lafayette, Indiana since 2008.
That's wild.
So they played in 2012 and 2016 out there, and they haven't played out there since 2016. And vice versa, Purdue has only made 1 trip to State College since 2013. It's just kind of neither here nor there, but the conferences are getting so, and it's only going to get worse. One thing we didn't really talk about was
USC,
Big Ten and USC and UCLA. It's only going to get worse, I think, when they add more teams. And it's almost like, how are you in the same conference with Purdue when you make 1 trip out there every 6 years or whatever? But neither here nor there.
Yeah, we'll see. And I don't know how they create those schedules for who you play on the or like the off years and whatnot. I'm sure they have some algorithm or something to figure that out, but I feel like some of that is also based on viewership, and they don't want to have these juggernaut teams playing some smaller teams because the views won't be as good. They kind of want to see, the best from the East kind of playing someone,
especially
more
once they add, once they add USC and UCLA, if they do it geographically, USC and UCLA are obviously going to be in the West, but they're going to want those teams playing Penn State and Ohio State and Michigan as much as possible. And I mean, I know the way they do it now basically is you get each team plays 1 protected crossover from the other division. Act like Indiana and Purdue are historic rivals and they're in different divisions. But for up until this year, for the last 6-year cycle, Penn State's protected team was Iowa. So if you looked at the schedule and we're like, man, we play Iowa every year, and we never see like Nebraska or Northwestern, it's because Iowa was the protected crossover, and that left the other 6 teams. You would only play 2 of them a year, and then you would cycle.
Rotate,
So, but it used to be Iowa, and I think now going forward, I think it's Illinois, maybe starting next year. I'm not sure,
so.
But yeah.
But we'll move on here. Getting kind of tight here on time. I just wanted to say, if we can just pick 1 game this week that you guys have as a pick 'em, and we'll keep the record as the season goes along. My one pick, I'm gonna have actually Florida beating Utah this weekend. So that's my one game. Florida's actually underdog by like 2.5 points or something, so it should be kind of close. But I think they go and get the win against Utah.
I'm going to take the fun one. I'm taking West Virginia over Pitt.
Oh boy. Backyard brawl.
Yep. Screw Pitt.
I like that pick. That's one I really liked. So now I'm kind of scrambling to find something.
Oh,
I mean, obviously,
sorry, Zach.
No, that's okay. The one game I think we would be remiss if we didn't mention, probably the biggest game of the week, maybe two really big ones, but Notre Dame at Ohio State is a big one. That's going to be played in Columbus. I don't think Notre Dame pulls it off. I think they're maybe going to be a little overrated this year. they're gonna have to find out who their quarterback is. So that game's gonna be interesting to watch. Just from
At least they found out who their coach was, right?
Well, that's true, and it's not Brian Kelly. Yeah, Cincinnati at Arkansas, another game with 2 ranked teams. Or number 11 Oregon at number 3 Georgia is another big one. I like Georgia in that one, but it'll be interesting to see.
So does the money.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if Oregon is a player in the Pac-12, because like most years you're looking at the Pac-12 and you're like, maybe Oregon, maybe USC, and then after that you're just Utah. Obviously Utah's pretty highly rated this year, and Jordan has them going down into Florida, which that's an interesting game in the swamp. So anyway, as I try to buy myself time, I'm struggling to come up with a game for the pick'em here, but I'm also on the West Virginia over Pitt. I'll just go with that.
That's fine.
I'll steal from Devin.
There are no rules here.
We literally don't know what we're doing. So
yeah, we wrote the script like 10 minutes ago. It's fun.
Go Mountaineers.
You know, our what are we up to, like 20 subscribers? They're gonna be real upset with that. So we did get some good viewership on the last
intro.
one, so
There was your intro, Jordan. We're up to 20 subscribers, so who cares?
Yeah, you know, I'm a realist.
Yeah.
But I think that's gonna wrap it up. Thanks guys for being on. We'll get this edited, hopefully be out a couple days before the game, and we'll keep these records going. We're all undefeated right now, so let's see.
Except for Nebraska.
Except Nebraska. You beat me to it. So, all right, that's it from the Nittany No Huddle studio. It's Jordo, headed out. Thanks for watching the Nittany No Huddle podcast. Make sure to like, subscribe, follow us on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and Spotify.